welcome to Uncovered. It's Wednesday. I'm Anthony. He's Ron. We're about to uncover the MAGA propaganda that is not covered by the mainstream and corporate media. And Ron, the coverage of the State of the Union speech last night has been fascinating to watch across the networks. Very few of the mainstream corporate networks, they don't talk about authoritarianism or dictatorship or any of the kind of realities of this authoritarian regime. I actually have spent much of this morning listening and watching Fox to see how they have been handling it and, of course, how they've been spinning it, because we know that so much of the MAGA audience, and not just the MAGA audience, I mean, a good number of Americans do actually watch Fox News. And so it's been interesting for me to see what they got out of it. What were your initial reactions to this kind of barrage of lies last night?
Yeah, a little tired from staying up late to watch it since it went so long. But it was clear, the Trump team went in there with a strategy based on the situation that was in front of them. And I think that they executed that strategy. I think it was a speech that was well received by his base, but I don't think it was particularly well received by anybody outside of his base. So, but we could talk about the polls and stuff, because I saw some of you have to realize too, the polls who are they polling when they do these polls about the speech? They're polling people who watch the speech, which is overwhelmingly Republican when there is a Republican president and overwhelmingly Democrat when there is a Democratic president. I think the CNN poll showed at least 13% more Republicans watched it than Democrats. So you have to, so when that same poll showed 70% thought it was a good speech. Well, that's 70%. That's largely a Republican audience, and that's part of that poll, number one. And number two, that's his lowest rating of any of his State of the Union speeches. This is his sixth one. This was his lowest. 70% was his lowest number that he's ever gotten. Right. So what was their strategy? Their strategy is two things. One was based on what the Democrats were going to do, and one is based on Trump. They know that Trump's weakness is going off on tangents, telling stories, rambling, going off onto his wild, the windmill. They didn't want windmills and Hannibal Lecter and all that stuff. The election was stolen. So the only way to do that is to pack the speech with so much stuff that basically, you're basically letting Trump know, if you do the story stuff, you're going to be there all night, and it's already late. So it was basically forced him to stick to the script, and he stuck to the script. Almost even some of the parts that looked ad-libbed, like when he was daring the Democrats to stand up, that was written into his speech. So there was almost nothing ad-libbed. And of course they filled it up with telling all these stories about crime victims and military guys and telling their stories. And that's Trump's wheelhouse. I mean, that's what, if you want to say there's something that Trump does well, talking about crime victims and giving medals to military people, that's something that Trump does rather well. So they figured, well, we'll fill up half the time with that stuff, and Trump won't have any time to talk about, the maniac stuff that he normally talks about. So one part of it was based on what Trump's strengths and weaknesses. The other part is based on what they knew Democrats were going to do, because it was already announced, was already pretty widely reported that Jeffries and Schumer basically said, I understand a lot of you guys are going to boycott this and go to alternative things like the one that we did. But for the ones who are going to attend, we want silence. We are going to sit. We are not going to clap. We are not going to say anything. We are going to protest this with silence. And for the most part, that held. But the Trump people knew that in advance. And so they wrote into their speech parts that were designed to take advantage of the Democratic strategy.
Right.
Which is the one part where he said, if you prioritize American citizens over illegals, stand up. And of course, Democrat strategies, we're not standing for anything. So, and then he's like, wow, I can't believe you won't even stand for that. So that was sort of written in there based on what the Democrats were going to do. And then, of course, they also they desperately, you probably heard this on Fox, they want to make Omar and Rashida Tlaib certainly like faces of the Democratic Party. And they got their moment, when the two of them started yelling, which I thought what they were yelling was justified. They were yelling about Preddy and Good being killed in Minnesota. But that they got their Fox moment, with the two of them yelling next to each other at Trump. And that's what they want to hold up as this is the Democratic Party, unhinged, out of control. And then, of course, Trump followed that up with a Truth Social post today saying that the two of them should be deported.
Let's. I don't want to show much of the speech because obviously people find any sight of him quite unpalatable. But I just want to show this moment where he used the Democrats not standing and kind of it appeared to come off script. And this was a very powerful moment for them to kind of reuse in clips. Let's take a look.
Nobody stands up. These people are crazy. I'm telling you, they're crazy. Amazing, incredible. Boy, oh boy. We're lucky we have a country. With people like this, Democrats are destroying our country, but we've stopped it just in the nick of time, didn't we? Huh?
Yeah. I wrote a Substack yesterday afternoon. I hope I got it out in time. It got quite a bit of traction, requesting that no Democrat showed up to this State of the Union speech. Yeah. And my rationale is that by having nobody there, that is a protest. But when you, as a leader, Hakeem Jeffries, allow people to do whatever it is they want, then you do not get that consistency and that leadership, and it becomes not a protest, but it becomes a kind of a nothing. And that's was my feeling, is that by having some people there and other people not there, it didn't really change anything. And even Hakeem being there, I thought was a terrible mistake. So I just wish that the Democrats appeared more unified, and they can do that by saying, okay, we are not attending this guy as a fascist, and we are not going to legitimize a fascist dictatorship in this country. And then if they were to do an alternative event, which of course they did, and we were involved in, I would have done it indoors because it was so cold. And so everyone's shivering and having to kind of shout. And I suppose the only criticism I have, and I don't like to criticize these things because I think that, most of the speakers were brilliant, and I thought Joy Reid was brilliant, and the whole thing was very heartwarming. But if they'd have only been in a hall and kind of tried to replicate the State of the Union for everybody else, they wouldn't have had to have kind of shouted and shivered, and they could have actually been more controlled because, it's all about visuals. And unfortunately, Trump, was warm and energized. I don't know what he'd taken before the show, but, it's actually my stepfather's 79th birthday today. And I was thinking about, if he could have stood up for an hour and 47 minutes and made a speech, and it's not actually easy to do that. And I felt that Trump was kind of on his A game, and that is a problem.
Well, look, I think people way overemphasize these speeches. We're 8 months out from the midterm. Nobody is going to remember this. Nobody is going to vote
sure
for a Republican congressperson in California because Trump gave a Medal of Honor.
But the clips, it's the clips that do the rounds, as you full well know, that do have currency.
They do, but I don't think they look. Here's the point. These are the groups of voters that are critical in this election, the ones that have moved off Trump, the ones that have since a year ago, the ones that are causing his approval rating to be in the high 30s right now. You look at what those groups are, because everything about politics and elections is about targeted messaging, is because many people are single issue. They care. Farmers care about the things that affect their farms. They're not going to vote for somebody because of, somebody gave a great speech. And there's nothing in there only thing farmers heard there was he's doubling down on the tariffs that are killing them and putting them out of business. That's the only thing they heard. Latino voters who have moved, all they heard was demonizing immigrants throughout the speech and migrant crime. That's the biggest voting bloc that has moved away from Trump in the past year is Latino voters. And he did nothing but demonize immigrants in that speech. The MAHA people, the Robert F. Kennedy people who came over to his side, 4 to 6% of the electorate that came over to his side when Kennedy endorsed him. He said nothing about, they're all pissed off this week about several things, which we'll talk about later. He addressed none of their concerns. So, small business owners with the tariffs, the affordability thing. At one point, he said that the data centers were actually going to cause electricity prices to go down when, everybody in America knows that that's a lie. They do the exact opposite. So I looked at it like there are specific concerns of specific groups who wanted to hear those concerns addressed last night. And instead they heard, they heard a bunch of rhetoric and had, medals handed out and hockey teams honored.
Well, it was a show. I mean, it was a production. I wrote in my Substack that it was like a P.T. Barnum production, except P.T. Barnum was a ringmaster and not the leader of the formerly free world. And if only Trump had stayed in the entertainment business, he would have done us all a favor. But I noticed that Trump's skill, the modulating the voice, the pulling back off the mic during the applause sequences, the timing of when he introduced the hockey team, and his voice just rode the wave of the applause. These are skills that Democrats do not possess. And unfortunately in America, and I've learnt this the hard way, that the show and the production and the award ceremonies and all of these things, this is America for a lot of people. They think that's what it is.
That's why his base and Fox reacted so favorably to the speech. Those are the kind, it was delivered well. But I would also remind people that the high water mark of the Biden presidency, from a public opinion polling standpoint, was his last State of the Union address, which was very well done. Right. And there were so many Democrats who went into that speech saying Biden shouldn't run, and I think he's too old to run. And they came out of that speech going, he's fine.
He killed it.
Our guys got it. We're good. 4 months later, he dropped out of the race. So that's what I mean. Like, these things don't have a great shelf life anymore in America. The days of the big speech, dramatically impacting an electorate for a long period of time, I think are over, especially in the social media era where our attention spans are like 5 minutes.
So it was basically a Trump rally. I mean, it wasn't really a State of the Union. Right. It wasn't a State of the Union speech as protocol would suggest. And, the whole kind of showmanship thing. I mean, let's just talk for a second about the use of emotional blackmail, bringing in these parents of deceased people, which was so, it was so inappropriate. It was so inappropriate to parade these people in this way. Now, I know there's a bit of a tradition of it here, but it really is, it lacks all taste and humility and humanity to put these families through these types of things.
Just take, for example, like the one woman, Irina, the Ukrainian woman. Just take that, for example.
Yeah.
Trump said that was a migrant who murdered her. It was not. It was Americans. He's mixing up, black people and the migrants. He's like, which group am I supposed to be demonizing?
To him? Yeah.
Yeah. Which group am I going? So he called that person who murdered her a migrant when he was not. He's born and raised in the United States. And second of all, there are literally hundreds of people getting killed in Ukraine every single week in cities, in apartment buildings, and hospitals being bombed because he has cut off aid to Ukraine, and he will not allow them to manufacture their own Patriot missile defense systems. He won't give them Patriot missile defense systems. So literally, while he's going on and on blaming Democrats for this one woman's murder, Ukrainian woman, Ukrainians are being killed every single day and begging for help, and he's turned his back on them. So, it's those kind of things that sort of bother me when, but this is what the Republican Party does very well. They wrap their arms around very successful patriotic things like the military,
the flag,
the police, the Olympic team, and they embrace these people that are successful, that are that people admire, and they wrap their arms around and they say, we're with them and they're not with them. You know, they're the other people. They hate these heroes. Right. You know, that's what the Republican Party does very well. And that's what they did very well in order to win 2024. Look, he even threw in the trans stuff again. Yeah. I mean, his whole campaign in 2024 was about migrants and trans people. And he did it. Then that was his speech last night, basically.
But he also brought in parents and a child who supposedly had their gender changed in school. And now, obviously, that story is entirely inaccurate, but that was irrelevant. And I was fascinated to see how the kind of family sit there and listen to him kind of making the story suit his narrative.
Yep.
But the fact that the camera kind of focuses on them, it does legitimize his argument. And again, for the clips, this is all very helpful.
That polls like 80%. You know, if you polled like, should if you polled Americans on whether people should get surgeries, you know, or you know, transitioning, if they should be able to do that, almost all of them will say they have no problem with it as long as they're adults. But when you start saying, should it be done with children, that's when 80% of the country goes the other way.
Right,
and so
but it isn't done with children.
That's why they picked that example.
Right. And this is the point. You know, if there is an anomaly, they'll use the anomaly as the example.
Exactly right.
And this is the problem. But the Democrats, therefore, and that's why it frustrates me that the Democratic response is pre-recorded, because, you know, if they were able to do their response in real time and do it live and have somebody who was energized enough to be able to take these notes and basically go through Trump's State of the Union speech and say, this was a lie, this was a lie, this was a lie, this was propaganda, this was a lie, and actually call it out. But instead, we had to watch Abigail Sandberger doing a fine job. But again, these people are not show people. And she's probably only read a teleprompt 2 or 3 times in her life. And so it ends up being a very kind of robotic performance compared to Trump, who literally loves the camera. So it's so hard in these moments to allow Democrats to shine.
Yeah. And you're going off really late doing the response
right,
you know, after he gives a 2-hour speech. So, yeah, again, like I just don't get caught up in these things anymore like I used to. You know, years ago, I used to live and die on these kind of things. But I just especially now, like it's just, I also think like H.W. Bush, again, like the high water mark of his was like his 1991 State of the Union. I think his approval rating was like 82% after that or something.
Right.
And literally like a year later, he's getting his butt kicked, you know, in the election. So
do you think the numbers will change off the back of Trump's speech?
I don't think they will change at all. His approval, maybe 1 point, something like that, but he will not get a bump off this, because I really think substantively he had an opportunity. I think if he really went all in on the affordability stuff and released a package of 3 or 4 policies that he was going to do to make things more affordable. But look, here's what people know. People aren't stupid when it comes to tariffs. Things that affect their own pocketbooks, they understand. They understand when Trump slaps a 50% tariff on aluminum, that makes their beer more expensive because it's in a freaking can. That, you know, it makes their appliances more expensive. People get that, and they see their prices go up. So, you know, I thought when the Supreme Court made their decision, they were actually going to bail him out on some of these tariffs. Not all of them. They're actually going to help him out. But no, Trump can't stand prosperity. You know, he immediately imposes a new global tariff, by the way. The section that he's now having to rely on for tariffs, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but you have to, that law requires you to tariff every country in the world the same. Mm-hmm. And so it's an absolute killer. It's an absolute kill. It's the worst possible tool that Trump can try and use, but it's the only one that he can use without going to Congress. So it's a mess.
What did you feel about the way he kind of called out the Supreme Court sitting in the front row over their tariff decision?
Yeah, well, I thought I thought that his speechwriters were very afraid of him going after them personally and made sure that he didn't do that. You know, I think that they really, I think that what he said there was extremely mild compared to what he probably wanted to say.
Sure.
But I think that it was beaten into his head, like, do not do this.
Yeah.
Do not go after the justices, because that would have really made him look bad. And the one part that you played there, I thought was his worst part of his speech, where that was the one part where he went off script, where he started yelling at the Democrats that they were crazy. He should have just let that moment stand without, but it actually bothered him. The silence really did bother him.
Well, that's why I said that no Democrats should have shown up, because
I agree with you.
If you understand narcissistic injury and you recognize that he cannot handle being
he would have hated
being disliked. That is how you play to this guy, and so you pull everybody out
to be used as a prop.
And he did it time and time again. And the camera cut to Elizabeth Warren just looking like a rabbit in a headlamp, and it cut to Hakeem Jeffries kind of whispering, and again it was not a good look. Now I don't want to beat up on Democrats, but I am just trying to play devil's advocate a little bit, because most of the coverage is that Trump had a terrible night, and I don't think he did. I think that I think
it was a nothing.
It was very light on detail, but it was very heavy on showmanship. Yeah. And we know go on.
I'm sorry. I don't think he did anything that hurt him.
Yeah.
And I don't think he did anything that really helped him. I just think it was a wash, in my opinion.
Well, it was just for TV ratings, I guess. I mean, that's the way he sees it, like a TV show. I'll show one final clip of him towards the end of the speech where he's kind of losing his voice a little bit. But, obviously the drugs work. Let's take a look.
Across the daunting and dangerous continent, we carved paths through an unforgiving wilderness, settled a boundless frontier, and tamed the beautiful but very, very dangerous Wild West. From empty marshes and wide open plains, we raised up the world's greatest cities. Together we mastered the world's mightiest industries and shattered history's monstrous tyrannies.
Yeah, see, that was the worst bit. I mean, put the word frontier into a speech and suddenly it gives it gravitas, but you have to deliver those types of words with some energy. And he'd kind of run, the gas tank was kind of empty by then.
That's the kind of stuff that Trump does not do well with.
Yeah.
Which is that was the big conclusion to his speech. That was the grand finale. So, that was like the second to last line. So you're writing there it's supposed to be the big crescendo, the flowery rhetoric ending on a high note. And they wrote all this flowery language in there for him. And those would be lines that Barack Obama would deliver beautifully. Ronald Reagan would deliver them beautifully. John Kennedy would, I mean, there's a lot of politicians who would have delivered those kind of lines. Kamala Harris would have delivered those lines quite well. But Trump, that's not Trump's bag, man. Reading those, first of all, some of those words were more than 2 syllables. So that right there presents a challenge for him. Mm-hmm. And you see him, he's got the death stare on the teleprompter, because these are not words that he is used to speaking. He doesn't talk like this. And so they wrote for him some lines there that sounded like, maybe a Reagan speech, but he wasn't, that's not how he speaks. And so it was so hard for him to deliver those lines. And also, I think he was really tired by that point.
Yeah, I mean, it is a lot, and I was watching on C-SPAN, and so I saw the coverage of him kind of not just coming in, but when he was leaving as well, and he was talking to everybody. Everybody was handshaking him and coming in, and he seemed to have enough energy for them, even though the speech was over. And I found that quite interesting because, even at my age, after that speech, I would have needed an immediate lie down and be like, don't talk to me. Please go and have a rest.
Because that's his nuclear energy. I mean, that's that's his life force, is adulation. So when he's getting that love and adulation,
right,
and we love you, you're the greatest.
It's the elixir.
That's rocket fuel for him. That picks him right back up, because there's nothing he loves more than that.
We should just mention the event, the kind of counter event that went on, that Midas Touch was involved in, and I mean it was so it was so real by comparison. You know, if we're talking about the Republican effort in the House there being entirely fake and full of lies, the counter protests and the counter State of the Union, I should say, was just so real and authentic and heartfelt. And we were hearing the voices and seeing the faces of people that are directly affected by Trumpism and the fascism that comes with that. And as I said, I hats off to Joy Reid for holding it all together, but I thought it was a really very impressive event.
We had, as of right before we started, over 4 million views across multiple platforms, which is great. You know,
Yeah.
I'm really interested to see how much of a bite that took out of the ratings of Trump's speech, whether it affected it all. I predict that this is going to be one of his low. We'll get the ratings tomorrow. I predict this will be one of his lowest rated speeches from a TV rating standpoint, just because of how long it was. I think there's so much Trump fatigue in the country where people are just tired of seeing his, not just Democrats. I think everyone, even Republicans, except for the hardcore, cultists, are tired of seeing his face, hearing his voice, hearing the same lines over and over again. It's been 11 years. 11 years this man has been front and center in our life. Yeah. So I think that there's a lot of that Trump fatigue. So we'll see what the numbers are. Hopefully we helped pull some people away that maybe would have tuned in on him, on his speech, just to hate on him, but instead decided, and I'm not even going to bother. I'm just going to go watch theirs.
Yeah. Well, I was flicking between the two, and I was watching one and listening to the other. I'm quite good at having like multiple screens on at once. And I find myself tuning out because I cannot stand his frequency. It kind of grates on me, as I'm sure it does a lot of people. Yeah. He was awarded another medal. I mean, he talked in the speech about giving himself a medal again, but didn't the hockey team give him a medal earlier in the day?
It's so funny how obsessed he is with trophies and medals. This is and I think it's probably because he didn't get any growing up, like he wasn't a great athlete. He was an average high school baseball player, despite his claims that he was some great player. He wasn't. He didn't play any other sports. He didn't win golf tournaments or anything like that. So, he just grew up like not winning anything athletically. And I think he always wanted to be that guy. That's why he hero worships these athletes so much, whether it's football players, golfer, the only people that you see Trump fanboy where he's not Trump anymore. He's right. Like a little kid is when he's in the presence of a great athlete, and that's a great dictator. Why he like endorsed Herschel Walker. I mean, he just like worships these guys. And so you knew when the hockey team won, I mean, he's going to wrap himself all in that, and get him in the Oval Office and all that kind of stuff. And I just knew like, there's no way that he's going to be able to resist not trying to get one of these medals and put it on. And of course he did. And, I think a lot of people are upset at the hockey team for, again, being used as a political prop. But I think pretty much what everybody has to realize is a lot of these hockey kids they grew up in wealthy families. They're white, they're Republican families for the most part, from Republican areas. And, a lot of them probably like Trump. That's the bottom line. So I think a lot of us felt like, oh, they're being used. Maybe some of them are being used, but I think a lot of them were very happy to be there.
Let's take a look.
I'll trade you that for a pound.
Hey, that's cool. There we go. I never thought I'd ever have this on my...
Yeah, they're kind of into him. I mean, and that is what annoys me so much about him, isn't it? That he is able weirdly to forge relationships with people in this way, and in a way that I haven't seen from Democratic leadership.
I mean, I'll just say one more thing about hockey too. By the way, look, I grew up in the Northeast, and I always wanted to be a hockey player, but I couldn't. My parents literally could not afford for me to play hockey. Every single year growing up, I begged them to sign me up for competitive hockey leagues. I would have to play pickup games, on ponds, on bogs and cranberry bogs and things like that in neighborhoods, because my parents literally couldn't afford the gear. and couldn't afford to pay the dues. Hockey is a very expensive sport.
Sure.
So that's what I mean. Like, a lot of these kids grew up in
white, wealthy households. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so it's no surprise to see them sort of going along with this, and embracing Trump.
They also embraced Kash Patel in the locker room, though, didn't they? I mean, this is another story where the FBI director was not where he was supposed to be and ends up being filmed, because there's always a camera around, drinking with the hockey team in the locker room. Let's take a look.
Courtesy of the red, white, and blue.
I sometimes worry that this is America. What we're seeing there is kind of encapsulates America, and those kind of liberal minds who live on the coasts maybe have pushing too hard against it. I think that's what Europeans are feeling right now. From what I've been hearing, they're like, that's the thing that worries us.
It's a big chunk of it. And that's why, I constantly hear from Democrats, like, how can his approval be at 38%? Or how can even 40% approval? I'm like, how many places in the country have you lived?
Right.
How many people have you interacted with? I mean, like, I don't, there's a big chunk of this country that is like that. I mean, a big chunk. I mean, have you been to Georgia? Have you been to Alabama? Have you been to Texas? Have you served in the military? I've been in all these places. I can tell you that there's a lot of people, my family members, who are fanatical Trump supporters, and all the things that we hate about Trump is what they love. So, but let's just talk about the Kash trip too, because nobody really, Kash, we know that is a hockey fanatic. He grew up playing hockey. He loves hockey, plays in the men's league in DC. I saw one reporter posted that he said that Kash is the worst player in their men's league. But, he loves hockey, and he's been to a bunch of hockey games this year already. And so if he'd have just said, like, look, months ago, look, if they make the gold medal game, I'm going to go over there. I'm a hockey fan. I'm going to pay my own way. Nobody would have cared. Nobody would have cared. But what does he do? He sets up these bogus meetings where he's meeting with security officials. He claims that he is only going over there to learn from the security officials at the Olympics to prepare so he can be prepared for the World Cup when it comes here. So that's his claim, that he's really not going over there for the hockey thing. It's just, while I'm here, I might as well go see the hockey game. And so that the story gets out, it breaks that he's spending literally millions of dollars it's costing taxpayers for him to take the FBI jet over there, hotels, security, everything else. He's there for 5 days. There's some major incidents that are happening here. You got the Guthrie missing persons case.
Right.
You had another Trump supporter who is obsessed with the Epstein thing, shot and killed at Mar-a-Lago. While this is happening, while Kash is partying with the Olympic team, someone's getting shot at Mar-a-Lago with a firearm on Trump's property while he's there. So it's so that's one thing. You have him trying to justify it, spending all this taxpayer money. But then just as that is dying down, this happens. He ends up in the locker room, fanboying them, jumping up and down, partying with them. Just a horrible, horrible look for him because he's there on the taxpayer dime and because of the way he's behaving. He's supposed to be the FBI director of the United States. And by the way, this is not the first time. He's already been in multiple controversies where he's flying his girlfriend around. He's taken the plane to go watch her sing the national anthem at wrestling events. this is not the first time. And then we have new reporting out, where there was 2 major incidents where the FBI needed the plane, but they couldn't have it because he was using it.
Yeah. Let's take a look.
The whistleblower says that in December of 2025, when there was a mass shooting at Brown University, Kash Patel was on his government FBI director jet in Florida, we are told, and that there was only one other available jet. But Patel had ordered it to be put on standby for another team. And that meant that during this mass shooting, an evidence review team based in the Washington, Virginia area that would normally immediately respond to a major crisis, a major crime scene like this, was delayed. They could not use the plane. And instead, they drove through the night of the 13th and the early morning of the 14th to get to Providence, Rhode Island from Virginia. They happened to also drive through a snowstorm to get there, but they were significantly delayed, according to this whistleblower's account. And by the way, also according to multiple sources that spoke to Ken and to me.
I mean, this is the problem with selecting people for these senior roles who are inexperienced, unsuitable, and unserious. Because, you know, these jobs require serious people. I mean, look at James Comey, for example. You know, people through history that have been in this job who are highly skilled, specialized, but also recognize the importance of the job, not just for the US, but for other nations looking on and seeing how the country operates. Right. And I just can't get that image of him jumping up and down, you know, covered in beer, out of my head. I mean, that's how I will think of Kash Patel from now on.
You got Hegseth doing the same thing, putting out these weightlifting videos. You got Robert F. Kennedy, you know, half naked in a hot tub working out with Kid Rock,
talking about snorting coke
Sean
off the toilet
Duffy's
seat,
doing the same thing in the airports, chin-up bars in the airports. You know, it's like it never ends. And by the way, this same report also indicated that the trip, a team that needed to deploy to Utah after Charlie Kirk was shot, was also delayed because Kash had the jet in New York City when he was out to dinner at the time. He took the FBI jet from DC to New York City to go to dinner. So another little caveat to that is this: how do we know this? This is an FBI whistleblower has come forward and ratted him out. So what we are also seeing, I've heard a lot of retired FBI agents talk about this, is that their antenna pricked up when this report came out, because they're like, this means that there's people inside the agency who have had enough of this guy and they're leaking everything now. And this is going to be the tip of the iceberg, you know? So but it doesn't, you know, every time you have one of these incidents where he gets busted doing something stupid, I always think, oh, now he's learned his lesson. You know, now he's not going to do it again. And then he does something worse, literally like weeks later. The guy just doesn't get it. But I think what they're all figuring out is in this Trump 2.0 administration, it's almost impossible to be fired.
Yeah.
Look at Kristi Noem, you know, all of these people, like no matter what they do, no matter how much trouble they get in, none of them ever get fired.
Well, because they all facilitate Trump's desires, right? And so as long as they are brown-nosing him, and as long as they're sucking up to him, and as long as they are carrying out these illegal orders, I mean, this is the thing about a regime, that it's about loyalty. And as long as their loyalty remains, then what they get up to in their personal time or even on company time is kind of irrelevant. I just think that anybody who's like, oh, well, Noam's done now, she's going to get fired. You don't know who Trump is. These people are all criminals. So they look after their own.
Well, but the thing that causes me to like think sometimes some of these people are going to get in trouble is if they're hurting Trump, you know, if they're hurting, because I believe that all these antics, you know, Kristi Noem going down to the El Salvador prison, you know, posing for videos or riding horses in Chile. I think that all this stuff is part of the reason why Trump's approval rating is 38% is because of these people. It's not just Trump. And so I thought, well, you know, these guys are embarrassing him, embarrassing his administration, hurting him with all this personal stuff, like Noam and her affair with Lewandowski. Like, this is not something that helps Trump in any way. It only hurts him. So, but you just have to come to the conclusion that I think, like, there's either one or two reasons why they're not being fired, why no one's being fired. Either it's because Trump doesn't want to give a quote unquote win or a scalp to the media or the Democrats or whatever. So he doesn't want to give them a win by firing anybody, let's say, because that's the way he looks at it in his twisted head. So it's either that, or it's the fact that maybe all these people have so much dirt on each other or covering up so much stuff that he just can't get rid of them.
I mean, I also think there's a third option, and that is that I don't know that Trump is really running the government anymore.
Oh,
I mean,
that's true.
This is Stephen Miller's government. Stephen Miller probably wrote that State of the Union speech. Stephen Miller tells Trump, because Miller clearly has a skill to kind of work Trump, manipulate him, control him, and get exactly what it is that he wants. And, you know, in some of the reporting that I've been doing, we've been talking about the fact that if Democrats want to do anything of value right now, is get Stephen Miller fired, get Stephen Miller taken out of this administration and hauled over the coals. Because if you get rid of Miller, I think it changes quite a lot, including a lot of this far-right extremism that Trump is signing off, because Miller knows how to get him to agree to it.
One of the articles, I think it was Washington Post, just did an article about this week, where basically what the case that they made about Miller, whether he would be fired or not, was, I thought, very persuasive, which is Miller has involved himself in virtually every area of the administration, not just immigration, but foreign policy stuff, domestic policy, taxes, tariffs. Miller's involved in everything. And so he has almost made himself like too big to fail, too big to be fired.
Indispensable.
If Trump fired him, it basically would disrupt everything that they're doing in the administration, because he's sort of the point man. So I agree. You take out Miller, you take out so much of the toxicity in this administration and the rallying point for it. But I think that's also the reason why Trump won't fire him. You know, he's almost become indispensable to that organism.
The phrase I've used before is elder abuse, and I maintain that there is some of this going on, because, you know, Trump is clearly compromised. We don't know much about his schedule. I mean, I look at his daily schedule, and sometimes there's nothing on it. I mean, this guy needs to take a lot of rests, executive time, where he's just sitting up in bed watching Fox and TV and is, you know, posting on Truth Social. So they obviously are very aware of when is the best time to kind of communicate with him, to get things away. There's this whole world we don't really know about, Ron, that is taking advantage of an old man.
No, you're right. I mean, he has nothing on his schedule today, because yesterday probably wore him out.
Yeah. It's a recovery day. Let's talk about RFK Jr. for a moment, and talk to me about this weird controversy, this through the MAHA, Make America Healthy Again, which is riddled with irony, and this issue about these pesticides that, you know, because RFK's basically done a U-turn and is now endorsing the use of these toxic pesticides in agriculture that effectively goes against everything that he's ever really been saying.
This is a very big issue. You know, I follow all these MAHA people, you know, the Robert F. Kennedy movement, and it's a kaleidoscope of different people. And keep in mind, this is not like Republicans. They weren't really anything. You know, they float. Some of them were Democrats, some of them were Republicans, some of them were libertarians, some of them were nothing. So this is not really like, they're not tethered or wedded to any particular political party.
Yeah.
They decided to hold their nose and vote for Trump because RFK is their guy, and he told them to do that, and he was assured them that he was going to get a very senior cabinet position, and so they voted for Trump based on that. But then they also thought that RFK was going to implement a lot of these things. Well, here's what we know. A lot of what they want in their agenda, and by the way, the consultants are nervous as hell that these none of these people are going to show up for the midterms because they're not Republicans. They don't really care about Republicans running. They don't care about Ted Cruz. They don't care about Lindsey Graham. They don't care about Republicans running for Congress. They voted for Trump. They don't really care about Trump. They voted for Trump because of RFK.
Yeah.
So the question is, how are you going to get these people to show up? What's the enthusiasm level to get them to remain loyal to the Republican brand? Well, they have an agenda, and their agenda is largely anti-big ag, anti-big food, anti-big pharma. That's who they are. Those are the unifying principles. The problem with Trump is he's the opposite.
Right.
He's pro all of that. Those CEOs of big ag and big food, they're his cronies, they're his buddies. They write $1 million checks to the ballroom. They're the ones who can get him on the phone. They're the ones who can get Susie Wiles on the phone and Stephen Miller on the phone, right? So the MAHA people, somebody who's for regenerative farming running a blog is not going to get Trump's attention. But a CEO of a big food company of Cisco is going to be able to get Trump on the phone in 5 minutes.
Right.
So you have this clash here where you have all this stuff that Robert F. Kennedy is banning this particular chemical that is used on wheat, for example. And there's many others, the food dye stuff they've just retreated on. So he's promised them all this stuff and none of it is happening. And then Trump issues the executive order on the wheat chemical this week, which not only does he not ban it, which is what RFK promised their people, RFK says this chemical causes cancer. Yeah. He said that many times. And so Trump not only doesn't not ban it, he issues an executive order this week to ramp up, increase domestic production of this chemical because it's largely manufactured in other countries and imported. So he wants to do away with our dependence and ramp up domestic production. So this executive order comes out and MAHA went absolutely ballistic, went bananas. Yeah. And they looked to RFK and they thought, well, RFK is going to denounce this. He's going to say he doesn't agree with this. Oh, no. RFK absolutely went along with it. Here's what he told him. He said, okay, I understand that this causes cancer. I haven't changed my mind about this. It's still really, really bad, but we need a transition period. We need a period of time where these agricultural companies can find alternatives and wean their way off this chemical. And that is not what these people wanted to hear.
I think that this exposes that hypocrisy is kind of irrelevant to them because the detail is irrelevant. It's all about revenue. Money comes first. And this is about, as you say, donors, but it's also about money from tariffs and everything else. I want to play the clip of RFK claiming, I think it was on the Katie Miller show, wasn't he? Talking about how, and this was a few weeks ago, about how this particular chemical, glyphosate.
It was a month ago.
Yeah. A month ago, right. Yeah. Causes cancer. Let's take a look.
Well, I believe that glyphosate causes cancer. I believe that masks, that there's no...
Yeah. So there's your receipts, there's your evidence. And now what we're looking at is all of this criticism. Emerald Robinson saying congrats to the White House for alienating all the MAHA voters over glyphosate just before the midterms. Great job, everybody. And another, what Trump didn't mention in his State of the Union, MAHA. This is notable because the MAHA coalition says they can help push the GOP across the line in the midterms, but Trump didn't make a single overture to RFK Jr. or to any of his initiatives from vaccines to healthy foods. So this is just confirms what you're saying, is that these are basically separate factions of the government. And RFK is in his lane and Trump's in his lane, and they don't really care about the fact that they're contradicting each other because the whole government is a scam. We're just piecing the receipts together, but the whole government is a scam, from tariffs through everything that Trump does. So why would they care?
And this is, I think a lot of the people in the MAHA movement are waking up to the fact that RFK really believes more in RFK, in his ego, in his narcissism, than any any of the principles of their movement.
Yeah.
And this is a very big opportunity for Democrats. We were talking about this among the Midas people this week, which is fundamentally most of these people are traditional Democrats. They're progressive type people that are, part of the organic movement, part of the regenerative farming movement, healthy eating, all of this stuff. I think these are issues that find their natural traditional home in the Democratic Party, not the Republican Party. But somehow, RFK was able to sort of band them all together, and he was only able to do it because of COVID.
Yeah.
See, because he was a bit player that hardly anybody knew in that genre prior to COVID. But COVID, all of them rallied to his banner because he was anti-vax, right? So, and he thought it was a government conspiracy and the whole thing. So he was able to sort of coalesce that movement. But I really think that as they become more disillusioned, Democrats could and should make a play for these voters and bring them home. But they have to start speaking to these issues again, because you just don't hear, since Obama, you don't hear Democratic leaders talking a lot about this stuff.
No.
The pesticides.
Yeah. Well, they're too focused on affordability and on
healthy eating and healthy food
and ICE murders.
Like the food, like no more food dyes. That was something when RFK said that, actually many Democrats were like, we totally agree with this. We're fine with it.
Yeah.
But by the way, I will also mention that this week they rescinded that ban on food dyes. So
we should also
announced it and then they took it back.
We should also remember that Trump co-opted RFK Jr. because he wanted the votes that RFK represented.
Doesn't care about any of the issues.
Didn't care about any of the issues. He basically cut him a deal, and he kind of promised him the earth, and I'll give you a health secretary and all this stuff in return for RFK kind of sitting on his opinions and coming into the fold. And that represented a chunk of votes that helped Donald Trump win the election.
It worked. And there are many consultants who believe that was the difference in the election, was those MAHA votes coming to Trump. And I think you could certainly make that case.
Okay, let's take a quick break. We're going to come back and look at these key documents from the Epstein files that we now know have been covered up. We'll do that next on Uncovered. Channel the fresh start energy of the new year and finally launch your business with Shopify. 2026 is the year you rewrite your story, your own future, and make your entrepreneurial dreams come true. Start your business with Shopify in 2026 and become who you're meant to be. 2026 is the year you launch your business, the year you transform into an entrepreneur, founder, boss. One powerful move puts your future firmly in your hands. Starting a business with Shopify. Maybe you've got an idea you can't shake, a craft everyone tells you to sell, a store you've already designed in your head. With Shopify, 2026 is when you finally make it happen. Shopify gives you everything you need to sell online and in person. Millions of entrepreneurs have already made this leap, from household names to first-time business owners just getting started. Shopify gives you all the tools to easily build your dream store. Choose from hundreds of beautiful templates that you can customize to match your brand. Setup is fast with Shopify's built-in AI tools that write product descriptions and headlines and help you edit product photos. Marketing is built in. Create email and social campaigns that reach customers wherever they scroll. As you grow, Shopify grows with you. Handle more orders, expand to new markets, and do it all from the same dashboard. In 2026, stop waiting and start selling with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/uncovered. Go to shopify.com/uncovered. That's shopify.com/uncovered. Hear your first this new year with Shopify by your side. And links to our sponsors are in the description below. Okay, let's open the Epstein files for a moment, Ron. I see today that Larry Summers is to resign from Harvard after the Epstein files revelations there. I think there's a neuroscientist resigning from Colombia amid revelations about Epstein ties. We've got Bill Gates apologizing to the foundation that he has for connections to Jeffrey Epstein. Obviously, since you and I last met, the artist formerly known as Prince Andrew in England has been arrested and since released because of the Epstein files. The former ambassador to the United States from the UK, Peter Mandelson, a Labour MP, has been arrested. Apparently he was about to flee the country for the British Virgin Islands. What the frick is going on here? I mean, is this, to me actually, this second tranche, I know they love using that word tranche to represent these files, it really has thrown the cat amongst the pigeons, hasn't it?
Yes. And it appears the only people being held accountable for this are Democrats and Europeans. It doesn't seem many Republicans are holding themselves accountable.
Or even the president for that.
For any of it. Right.
Yeah.
So to me, the most explosive part, I still have maintained that the most explosive part of all of this still hasn't been released. It's the stuff that they are holding back, that they have redacted out or are holding back. And I think that there was a memo that was recently uncovered that was issued by Todd Blanche the first week of January when the law passed, to release everything, where he specifically directed that certain FBI reports should not be released. And we are now learning, based on what some of these sleuths and internet people and media groups have done, we are learning that some of these FBI reports included at least one young woman at the time, I believe she was over 18, but very young, who accused Trump of forcibly sexually assaulting her. And that was reported to multiple FBI, and she was interviewed multiple times. There were multiple reports done. We know that they exist somewhere, but they have never been released by the government still. And there would be no reason not to release them under this law. And so since we've now basically caught them not releasing something highly inflammatory and damaging to Trump, the question is what else is out there specific to Trump that we don't know about? So I still think this thing is a long ways from over. We may not really get to the meat of it until Democrats take over House oversight and are able to start issuing subpoenas and doing depositions. Because keep in mind, all these people, including Trump, have been, and Lutnick and have been shielded because DOJ will not investigate any of this, and neither will James Comer with House oversight. He will not investigate any Republican. So there's only so far that they can go by continuing to pass things, different bills and stuff. But I think there is a lot more to come on this. I think there's a lot more that could be very damaging. But and kudos to the people who are going through these files, because they're still going through them.
Yes,
and they're still working very hard to find things. But I still think that there's so much that DOJ is hiding.
Well, NPR have been doing an investigation. Let's take a look.
We can tell you that this particular victim witness had 15 documents that are supposedly reflective of her statements. We, as well as NPR, as well as another independent journalist, have all looked for each of those 15 documents, and all of us collectively have found only 7 of those 15. Again, all 15 of them are reflective of statements that she made, either to federal law enforcement, to state police, via email, but they are all supposed to be reflective of her accounting of events in one way or another. And yet, more than half of the documents that are supposedly attributable to this person are missing, including 3 memoranda prepared by the FBI reflecting interviews that they conducted with her in fall and in the fall and summer of 2019.
So what I think is also very important to underscore here is that not all of her interview files are missing. It's just some of the interview files, right?
I'd say most, because we know that this woman gave 4 interviews to the FBI, at least according to this index. Only one of those interview memoranda has been shared with the public. That interview doesn't contain any of her apparent allegations against Donald Trump, and yet we know that she has made them. How do we know that? Because the FBI's own internal correspondence and a presentation that they put together in the summer of 2025 reflects that this woman is also the same person who accused Donald Trump of sexually assaulting her. Where she said that, to whom she said that, we still don't know, because 3 of her interview memoranda are missing from the public production of the files.
As you say, more and more will come out over time. Remember the first time when they announced that they had the files, they're on my desk, all that stuff with Pam Bondi, there was that kind of scramble inside the FBI to kind of go through and remove any references to Donald Trump. But this is now coming back to haunt them.
Well, and the other thing that we need to learn is why none of this stuff was pursued at the time.
Yes.
I mean, what was just said there was that some of these interviews that the FBI did of this particular victim happened in 2019. Well, Trump was president then. Bill Barr was attorney general. So the question is, why didn't anything happen with that? Obviously, we know Trump was president at the time,
Right.
but we need detail. There could be memos from supervisors in the FBI complaining that this wasn't followed up on. There could be prosecutors who felt this should have been pursued, and maybe Barr squashed it. We don't know, because those are the kind of things that are being withheld from us right now.
And we know
Eventually, I think we'll find it all out. But the
Yes.
question is, is it going to be found out anytime soon? I don't know.
I was going to say that we know that William Barr was in the tank for Trump because he paraphrased the Russia investigation about 20 minutes before it was released, and to exonerate Donald Trump, even though Robert Mueller hadn't exonerated Donald Trump. So, that's really the proof that
They're using the same playbook.
Yeah.
Trump is saying, totally exonerate. I'm totally exonerated. Yeah. And so is Bondi. Same exact playbook as the Russiagate thing.
Yeah.
They're using here.
Same language. And I never forget Trump holding up that newspaper. Do you remember, with the exonerated thing?
Yep.
What's unfortunate about this, and this goes back to State of the Union, is that, because he knows how to use the media to his advantage, he does these things on purpose. He even leaves edit points. Have you noticed this? He knows where they're going to cut in and cut out for the clips. So he purposely pauses so that the soundbite it can be cut. That's what we're dealing with, a master propagandist and marketeer who is running a kind of, as we know, covering up the most serious child sex trafficking ring in history, and trying to kind of run this faux government with the other hand.
And we also, I think, really can now understand why he was so adamant about trying to prevent this from coming out.
Right.
Why he did everything he possibly could, kicking and screaming and fighting to keep this from coming out. And I think that's really the main reason why Pam Bondi was chosen as Attorney General.
Yes.
Was
and why she will never lose her job.
Specifically, her main job was to make sure that this never came out. And, it's coming out, but in dribs and drabs, kicking and screaming. We're having to pull it out. We're having to pass laws, and they're still not complying with the laws.
Why didn't she investigate it when she was Florida Attorney General? Why didn't she start investigations then?
Yeah, exactly. That's why she was picked. I think that more Epstein, more than any other reason, was why Bondi was chosen as AG.
Just tell me why. I heard Ted Lieu get up and talk about Donald Trump with an alleged association with a 9-year-old girl. He said this a couple of weeks ago. Why has nothing come from that? Why is he the only one saying that?
Yeah, I think him and Kana maybe got, because you have to be very careful with some of this stuff is part of the problem. It can lead you to dead ends because you don't always have all the material because it is heavily redacted. So some of this stuff is easily disprovable. You have a lot of crazy people that come forward and make claims, So I'm sure that the Epstein files contain hundreds, maybe thousands of false allegations against not Trump specifically, but many people, where they just came forward and accused somebody. And so I think they're, just crazy people. And I think that there's a lot of that probably in there. Look, after every assassination attempt, whatever it is, you have a million people that flood these FBI tip lines with all the we've had this in the Guthrie situation.
Yes.
So many crazy people have called in with all these crazy stories.
Right.
So there's lots of that, I'm sure, in the Epstein files. So I think a lot of them are a little bit careful about not latching on to one of these crazy claims that where there's nothing to back it up. So I think that that's part of the reason why some of them are cautious about, grabbing certain things in the files, because the problem is they don't have the full context because DOJ is denying them that.
Yes.
They're giving them, it's sort of like they're taking puzzle pieces and just scattering them all over the floor, and you're allowed to pick up one piece and tell us what the puzzle was.
I was thinking about when Trump admitted that Epstein had stolen Virginia Giuffre from the spa at Mar-a-Lago and taken her to, Epstein, to work for Epstein. I mean, what he was describing was trafficking of a kind. And we're starting to use the language of trafficking. There was some kind of allegations talking about Howard Lutnick and his nannies and various things there. Do you think it's more important now that we really start to recognize that a lot of the behaviors of these men, these wealthy white men, it really, it's far more underhand when you apply the appropriate language than people would originally perceive?
Yeah. And I try and do that all the time. I can. But I think it's easier for me because I worked in the criminal justice system for so long, so I understand the different terminology. But yeah, you're right. I mean, labeling things correctly is very important in a situation like this. You're not being politically correct or woke or anything like that. You're just being truthful.
Yes. I noticed that Lutnick was mostly ignored by people at the State of the Union speech when he was walking around. Did you see that? Given the cold shoulder by a few after him visiting the island.
Look, he's still largely been in hiding since these revelations. He testified one time in front of Congress and got beat up pretty bad.
Right.
But this guy used to be on TV 24/7.
Yeah.
And he's been out of sight. He's been hiding ever since this came out.
It's very embarrassing.
That's not sustainable. I mean, I don't know how long he's going to try and do that. He's either going to have to leave the administration or he's just going to have to get on TV and take his lumps on this stuff because people aren't going to leave it alone.
Or he might get promoted, Ron. I mean, that's the crazy regime that we're working with here. Okay, let's talk about Representative Tony Gonzalez. And just give us the backstory here. Now, this is a Republican representative who had an alleged affair with a staffer. And correct me if I'm wrong. And then the staffer went on to commit suicide. Is that correct?
Yes. Okay. So the original story was bad enough, and then new details just released 3 days ago, which made it even worse. And now he's in serious trouble because the initial story was the staffer that he had an affair with killed herself. Not only killed herself, but lit herself on fire. Killed herself by self-immolation. So that's how she died. So it was really, and she's a mom, she's young. It was just she's married, a terrible, terrible tragedy. They're both married. So that's one thing. Okay. So if it's a question of, why did she kill herself? We don't really know. We didn't really know. Was it a situation where she really wanted him to leave his wife and be with her and he wouldn't do it? So she was distraught and killed herself. We didn't really know the details. So he was in sort of some trouble, just the fact that he had this affair with the staffer that led to a suicide. But now we get details. Why do we get details? Because her husband is releasing text messages. He, of course, is in possession of her phone records, which include apparently thousands of texts between them. And he's starting to release these, make them public. And they paint a very, very bad picture, because what these show is that this was a situation where Gonzalez was basically stalking her, that he put tremendous amount of pressure on her to engage in an affair. She constantly was looking to end it, was looking to pull back, was looking to stop it. And he wouldn't leave her alone. And then ultimately this led to her suicide. So these text messages being released have been a game changer, because whereas before you really didn't have any Republicans that were publicly calling for him to resign, now I think we're up to 7 or 8 Republicans now who are demanding that he resign. And this is a big problem politically for Mike Johnson. I hate to veer into the politics, but this is a political show. They got it right now, a 2-seat majority with some of the people that they're missing. So if they lose Gonzalez, they're down to 1 seat if he resigns. 1 seat. And by the way, Massey happens to be voting with Democrats a lot these days.
That's right.
So it basically makes Massey the Speaker of the House, able to control the balance of power if Gonzalez resigns. This is why Johnson is freaking out. You got a situation where in any other universe, based on what we know, this guy should have resigned immediately, but Johnson doesn't want him to go because he needs his vote. So you got this holy roller Christian speaker who's now got to hang on to this degenerate scumbag, sexual predator, because he's got a 2-seat majority. That's what's going on right now.
I'll just remind our audience that Mike Johnson is no Christian. He's a Christian nationalist, which bears very little resemblance to being a good Christian in this moment. Let's take a look at Manu Raju chasing Representative Gonzalez through the halls of Congress.
No. You're not. Are those text messages correct? Are they accurate?
I am not going to resign. I work every day. I work every day for the people of Texas.
But are those text messages, are they accurate? Are those real text messages?
I am not going to resign. I'm not going to resign. I work every day for the people of Texas.
Did you carry it?
And there will be an opportunity for all the details and facts to come out. What you've seen is not all the facts.
Did you have an extramarital affair with the staff?
What you've seen is not all the facts, and there'll be an ample time for all of that to come out.
What are the facts? Can you address it right now? Your constituents want to know.
My constituents are not here in D.C. My constituents are back home in Texas.
What do you make of some of your colleagues?
What do you plan to tell the speaker?
I was not impressed with those questions, I have to say. I think that, if all of these text messages are being released, you don't then have to kind of try and get confirmation that they're real. If you just assume that they're real and ask questions based on the messages, you kind of get there, you get where you want to go a little bit quicker. Let's just have a look at this clip of him asking similar questions to the Speaker of the House. And as you say, how the Speaker of the House tries to wriggle away.
Mr. Speaker, why should Tony Gonzalez resign, given these very serious accusations?
There are serious accusations, and it must be taken seriously. And I've told him he's got to address that with his constituents, and he's in the process of doing that. Is my understanding. There's an investigation in the state of Texas on these matters, and has been going for some time. And the Office of Congressional Conduct has also, it's been reported. They've been looking at it. All of that was news to me. But I think, as in every case like this, you have to allow the investigations to play out and all the facts to come out. I've been intellectually consistent about this. Whether you're talking about Republicans or Democrats, you have to let the system play out. If someone, I was against, for example, the expulsion of George Santos a while back, because he had been accused of a crime and indicted but not found guilty. If the accusation of something is going to be the litmus test for someone being able to continue to serve in the House, you'll have a lot of people who would have to resign or be removed or expelled from Congress. So I think you've got to allow this to play out. I think it is very serious. The allegations are clearly very serious. And Tony Gonzalez will address it. I think he will.
Does he deserve to win re-election? Does he deserve to win re-election?
See you later, guys.
You're so right, Ron. I mean, it's so sad that the votes are more important than the lives of young women.
If Johnson had a 20-seat majority, he would be calling for him to resign.
Yeah.
But that's the bottom line. That's Mike Johnson cares about clinging to power more than anything, and more than the Bible or religion or whatever principles that he has. That's what he cares about. And his argument, well, we have to wait for a trial by jury. before we can ever expel anyone. So a member of Congress can murder somebody, rob a bank, engage in drug trafficking, be caught on video, text messages, overwhelming evidence. But, oh no, according to Mike Johnson, we have to let you continue to serve in Congress, one of the highest offices in the land, until a jury convicts you. That's not the standard for serving in Congress. That's the standard for staying out of prison.
Yeah.
Yes, we have to prove, a jury has to convict you beyond a reasonable doubt before we can take away your liberty, but not before we can take away your congressional seat. This is outrageous, and it just further hurts them. This guy hanging on, it's not going to go away. They had 5 votes yesterday. He skipped 4 of the votes because he was hiding. He doesn't even want to walk in the halls of Congress, because it's not just Manu, it's our guy Pablo. There's 20 congressional reporters waiting in ambush for this guy. He's not going to be able to hide from this. They're going to be relentless. And not only that, and it's not just Democrats. You have many, at least 7 or 8 now, who are demanding that he resign. So even with the situation of the majority, it's so bad that even people like Nancy Mace, Lauren Boebert, Tim Burchett, some of the most far-right Republicans are calling for this man to resign.
We also shouldn't underestimate the families of those involved, because the other thing we're hearing, I mean, you say it's the husband of this young lady that's releasing these text messages, but in the case of, say, the fishing boats that Trump's been shooting out of the water in the Caribbean Sea, you've got the families of the deceased now trying to sue the administration. And it's not just lawmakers that are starting to kind of make noise about these things, but it's friends and relatives of survivors, but also friends and relatives of the deceased as well. And to me, they're more impactful.
Also alleged that Gonzalez's representatives tried to buy him off and purchased the text messages.
Oh my God!
In exchange for an NDA, offered him like $100,000 or something.
Shit.
And to his credit,
yeah,
this guy did not accept that.
Well,
offer.
Of course not. No. You mentioned Lauren Boebert. She, too, had something to say. Let's take a look.
Congresswoman, so obviously you've called on Congressman Gonzalez to resign over alleged sexual misconduct. There's now a resolution that would reveal a lot more about the culture of sexual misconduct in Congress. Are you supportive of that? It's by Congresswoman Mace.
I'm absolutely supportive of Congresswoman Mace's resolution to uncover the other sexual harassment issues that take place here in our nation's capital. And even further, I am supportive of releasing the Congressional Hush Money Slush Fund. There's been tens of millions of dollars that have been paid out over the years here in Congress to keep Hill staffers quiet about alleged sexual misconduct and other forms of mistreatment in the office. So I would love to see every congressman who's ever had to pay a settlement to a staffer, and I'm certainly supportive of Nancy Mace's resolution.
I guess what would be your message to a staffer who finds themselves in these terrible situations where members are being creepy to them?
I mean, it's awful. It's awful in any workplace. It certainly shouldn't be held here. We have high standards. We agree to these standards. We promise hundreds of thousands of people that we are leaders of integrity, and it shouldn't be happening here.
Got it.
Okay, let's talk about Greenland for a moment, because I want to remind people that whilst that story might have died down in the US press, the Greenlanders and certainly the leaders in Denmark are not kind of going quietly over this. They recognize that the threat of Donald Trump wanting to take over Greenland is very much still a real thing. And in fact, Trump kind of tried to goad them with this claim that he's going to send the hospital boats there. He said, working with the fantastic governor of Louisiana, Jeff Landry, we're going to send a great hospital boat to Greenland to take care of the many people who are sick and not being taken care of. It's on the way, President DJT. And this weird kind of AI picture of a hospital boat heading towards the sunset. Firstly, we should say just logistically that the 2 hospital boats that the US has are both currently in for repairs. And so it's not even a true story, just technically. But secondly, what is behind this, Ron? Why does he keep kind of pressing these buttons in this way?
There's so many layers to this. This is just insane to me. One of the most insane things about this story is that media will not cover it. They just they ignore the crazy, wild, unless it's like him treating him posting Barack and Michelle Obama as apes. Then they suddenly become interested. But things like this, like, they largely ignore. And when this happened, like, this happened on a Saturday night. He posted this. We all woke up to this on Sunday morning. This craze, like, what are we doing? We're sending a hospital ship. I thought, what, did something happen in Greenland?
Right.
A big epidemic? Everybody's dying and we have to send medical help. What's going on? So I plugged into my Greenland sources, because there are many people from Greenland, journalists and stuff, and politicians that I follow because of all the other controversies. And so I plugged into them, and they were all like, they were baffled too. They're like, they were all waking up to it going, what is he talking about? And then as you untangle it, you find out. But on the Sunday shows, not one, and since that time, not one Republican has ever been asked about this on any network show, which I find just absolutely infuriating and mystifying, because this is completely batshit crazy.
Yeah.
Here's what happened. I mean, we had a nuclear sub that was there in the Greenland area, and apparently one of the sailors on board got very, very ill and was unable to be treated by the doctor on the sub or the medical staff on the sub. So it had to surface, and they had to drop him off at the capital of Greenland, and he had to be treated in a hospital there. So that happened on Saturday. So rather than Trump just either ignore that or come out, see, because I think Trump in his addled, crazed brain thought that the news was going to come out about that and it was somehow going to make him look bad.
Right.
Because at a time when he's claiming that the U.S. has to take over Greenland because Greenlanders can't govern themselves or take care of themselves, at the time he's making that claim, Greenlanders are actually bailing us out and helping out one of our sailors who we are unable to treat because we didn't have the resources in the area because we've shut down a lot of our bases in that area. So I think it was just a simple matter of Trump just simply not wanting to thank the people of Greenland and admit that they did something good for us. He would have perceived that maybe as a weakness on our part. So he invents this cockamamie, insane story that there's a bunch of people in Greenland are sick, and he's going to send a hospital ship there. Well, first of all, no ship was ever sent. Why the governor of Louisiana was designated for this, I guess he's like this new special envoy to Greenland.
That's right. He's the Greenland kind of liaison.
But not only did this make Trump again look like a maniac, but it also emphasized two key points. Number one, we have 2 Navy hospital ships. Both of them are out of service. They're both in dry dock and have been for a while. So we don't even have, it illustrated the fact that we don't even have right now a hospital ship that's available for our own people, much less the people of Greenland. And it also illustrated, number 2, that Greenland, which all of their politicians immediately chimed in here, has universal free health care and made very clear that they don't need medical help from the United States. In fact, they helped us out. They don't need our help when it comes to medicine.
Yeah, well, that was my feeling, is that it was more about the socialized medicine that got Trump riled. The idea that an American service person was having to be treated because, they look down upon universal health care, right? So that was going to have to be treated in that kind of an environment. And instead of that, we'll send one of our hospital ships, which is going to do a much better job. That's kind of my read on it.
Yeah, but that's not what he claims. I mean, he claimed that there was a bunch of people sick in Greenland and Greenland was unable to take care of their own people.
Yeah. Well,
so how is it possible that the president of the United States can make this claim? And then the governor of Louisiana, by the way, made 2 separate posts saying that he is working on putting this rescue mission together.
Yeah.
And not one media outlet covers it. Not one media outlet, not CNN, not any of them, asks a single Republican about this crazy post that Donald Trump made. Not one question.
I mean, it just adds kind of evidence to the fact that with Trump, nothing is real. And so much of the rhetoric is it's just temporary. It's just transient information. It doesn't have to be based in fact for Trump to turn it into a story. It's irrelevant to him whether things are real or not. And unfortunately, that's what we're all dealing with. And that's what the media is dealing with. And so I guess they're having to pick their battles as to whether or not a story is worth covering because there's just no truth to it.
And once again, it throws everybody in Greenland into a turmoil
right
on a Sunday.
Right.
And it's like, for what reason? No reason.
Yeah. Well, the leaders of Greenland and Denmark kind of came out and said, we have excellent healthcare in Greenland. And if there's a procedure that they're not able to do in Greenland, then as part of the socialized medicine, they get flown to Denmark and they have their treatment there. And so that's how it works. And it works very well. And no one in Greenland has any complaints about how it works. It's just, again, it
works better than in Louisiana where
right
Landry is the governor.
Yeah. Okay, we've got to finish in a sec. We've got one final story about Gavin Newsom, which is, came through Hannity's show, where they basically took a clip of Newsom and they tried to spin it to make it sound like that Newsom was saying that he is like black Americans because he didn't do so well in his SAT score. Is that about right? Let's take a look at the clip and make some sense of it.
I'm not trying to impress you. I'm just trying to impress upon you. I'm like you. I'm no better than you. I'm a 960 SAT guy. And I'm not trying to offend anyone, trying to act all there if you got 940. But literally a 960 SAT guy. I cannot, you've never seen me read a speech because I cannot read a speech. Maybe the wrong business to be in.
You're not afraid to go into red states.
No.
When I saw you slinging shots behind the coffee bar, I thought this guy might run for president.
I have no idea. The idea that a guy who got 960 on his SAT that still struggles to read scripts that was always in the back of the classroom, the idea that you even throw that out is in and of itself extraordinary. Who the hell knows? I'm looking forward to who presents themselves in 2028 and who meets that moment. And that's the question for the American people. They'll make that.
So Hannity took this story, Ron, and basically tried to spin it against Newsom. Newsom is dyslexic. He's talked about that many times in the past. So just explain why this is a problem.
Yeah, well, this really illustrates a couple of things. How the right-wing social media and media ecosystem works, their disinformation system, to try and destroy a Democrat. Yeah. And also it illustrates how afraid of Gavin Newsom they are, because they literally went all in on this based on nothing. So what you saw in the initial clip there is he's told this story many times, and he uses the example, like many politicians, when they get a good story, they beat it to death. Right. They tell it 100 times. Certainly Joe Biden did that plenty, and Gavin Newsom has told this story about his SATs hundreds of times, right? And he's on his book tour. This is part of his biography. So he's in front of this Atlanta audience, and the moderator there happens to be black. And so when he's telling the story this time, he says, I'm just like you. What he's trying to say is like, I'm not like a super elitist. I'm not from a super wealthy family. Wasn't valedictorian of my school. I didn't go to Harvard. I'm an average guy, and I think that's what the point he's trying to make. And what he's saying is the reason for his struggles is because he had a learning disability, and that has sort of helped him become better at being a governor, having that empathy for an understanding of what it's like to struggle in school because of a disability. But what they tried to do is make it like the account that initially put this out, where the clip went viral, said that it was an all-black audience. And so they made it sound like he was saying, I got 960 on my SATs just like all you people, because you're not that smart. That's basically how they interpreted it.
Right.
And then So it's one thing for just a troll right-wing social media account with a few million followers to put that out. But that was latched onto by many Republican members of Congress, Fox hosts. It blew up and went super viral, tens of millions of views, claiming that he made a racist comment, Newsom did. But then we later learned, a day later, this was largely almost an all-white audience. There weren't hardly any black people in that. There were some, but it was vast majority were white and older. And so, when he's gesturing to the audience saying, I'm just like you, I had average SAT scores, he's saying that to a largely white audience.
So it was racist
they made
projection.
It look like he was saying it about black people.
Right.
So it was all a lie. And another guy who pushed it was the Scott Jennings guy on CNN was pushing the lie too. And they were all claiming that this was a black audience when it was not.
Well, because Hannity and Fox would be like, Atlanta must be black audience, and saying low SAT score must connect with black. And it's just pure...
It really illustrated their racism.
They were projecting racism onto a situation where it wasn't warranted. Unfortunately, these are the kind of tactics that Democrats are going to have to deal with going forward. I mean, there is no flaw to this.
The final point I'll say is like one of the whole reasons why we formed the Midas Media Company, that it exists the way it exists, is exactly for this reason.
Yeah.
Because we saw how they did this in the past and how it was never responded to. It was never rapidly reacted to by Democrats. They just took it on the chin. 3 days later, they issue a statement. And, I just saw time and time again how their system works, the right wingers, how they operate, and Democrats not responding. And so now we don't let this stuff go. And we jumped on this right away, as did Newsom jumped on it right away, because he is a new style politician who understands how this game works as well as we do. But many Democrats are not like that. They don't understand the way the attack machine works. And that's one of the reasons why I think Newsom is a very good, strong candidate for president. There are many others, but he seems to understand more than anyone else how to deal with this ecosystem, this toxic ecosystem that's been created.
I couldn't agree more. And I just want to say that, Newsom is imperfect. He is an imperfect candidate. A perfect candidate does not exist. But looking at the landscape right now, as I see it, Newsom is the only person that can take on this pox of Trumpism, because he has the language, he has the confidence, and he's not afraid. And I think that, I fear that Democrats, the kind of Democrats in Congress will underestimate him, and they really shouldn't. Okay, we have to finish, but I'm grateful to you, Ron, as ever. I look forward to this every week. It really is mind expanding. We'll come back next Wednesday and bring you another episode of Uncovered. Don't forget to download the audio podcast that drops later tonight. Check out our sponsors in the description below, and we'll see you next Wednesday. Thanks, Ron.
See you next week, everyone.